Hello, hello, hello. Can everybody hear me without this? Yes. Button, right? There we go. So just an overview of our program. We do have 4 separate sessions: reproductive biology, seed orchard practices, and that's quite a big topic. It continues after our first break: seed testing and use, genetic conservation, restoration, and then we really wanted to get into some hands-on activities, so a session on low-tech tools and techniques. I'll be moderating the morning sessions. Melissa will be moderating the afternoon sessions. So a little bit about us. I'm supposed to look here. So we're part of the Canadian Forest Genetics Association. We've been in operation since 1983, so this is 40 years. We're quite pleased with that. Our objectives really haven't changed over that time: to promote seed science and technology through seed research from bud initiation to seed use, so what we call the seed handling system, identification of seed problems related to tree improvement and forest management, exchange information like we do on these workshops or through our news bulletins. So we like to continue, knowledge transfer. We work in a very specialized field. So we like to look at both the scientific end and the very applied end and really span that whole gamut, because it's really important not to get stuck on one end of that spectrum or the other. And it's an important complement to sort of the referee journals. Where do you put information that maybe is a failed experiment, that someone else doesn't fail, that we're not recreating the wheel? So it's, we feel, a good contribution to seed science and technology, particularly with tree seeds. So please, if you aren't a member, please join. We do put out a news bulletin twice a year. We have about 430 plus subscribers. We've just published, about to publish our 74th news bulletin next month. If somebody has anything newsworthy, please send them to Melissa, and we'll make sure they get in. We are also recognized as by Library and Archives Canada as part of Canada's public heritage. So every issue goes into our archives. And if you would like to look at any of the past editions, they can be found here. And please contribute. That's what keeps it going. A few other organizations I just want to mention briefly. UFRO 2.0903, Seed Science and Technology. I'm also involved with this organization. And Canada certainly has a rich history through Dr. George Edwards, Ben Wong, Tanis Beardmore, Kathleen Forbes, in terms of contributing to this organization. It hasn't been as active recently. A few years ago, we did a nice, cute video. I ask you to have a look at that. And one of the things that's archived on the webpage is all our proceedings from 1973 and 73 editions of the news bulletin that were put out. So it's a real incredible resource for some of the past history of work done specifically on tree seeds. And there certainly has been peaks in production in terms of tree seed research over time, where we really haven't had that much emphasis over the recent past. A very little bit about the ISTA Forest Tree and Shrub Committee. One of the things that we're working on now, there was an OECD ISTA joint handbook of seed testing and nursery practices. It really didn't get fully populated, but we are trying to do that with an emphasis on germination testing, particularly on identification of abnormal seedlings in germination testing. So we're sort of starting small, going to the genus level, removing the nursery component, and you're all welcome if you have illustrations. I use abnormal germinants just because that's one of our obvious things that a lot of people have issues with in terms of a testing program. If you have something you think you can contribute, please see me. Why are we here? There's a lot of attention in the press to tree planting. There's a lot of big promises, and I think things are a little more positive now, but really seed has been an afterthought to this. Oh, we need seedlings. Oh, we need nurseries. Oh, what do we need? What do nurseries need? And I think we have this feeling that we know all about seed biology, but these other things are changing with respect to climate change, and I think we have to question our assumptions with regards to tree seed as well. I really love this paper, and I think it's a really good review. I would really recommend you look at it. And what I love about it, it's really looking at what is success in the end. And it's not just seed, it's not just nurseries. We have to consider all those 4 components as we go through. Obviously here we're focusing on seed, but the nursery, the outplanting and post-planting performance are really critical if we really want to get reforestation working on the landscape. One of the issues here, certainly those handoffs are places where you can have some reductions in efficiency, and I think that's where we have to spend efforts. That's the big advantage of some of these vertically integrated companies. Handoffs are quite simple, although one of the things I've noticed sometimes within vertically oriented companies, it's more difficult to criticize your colleague than it is your contractor. One of the things, certainly as we go down this stream of events, is costs also increase quite a bit. So seed is something that you're going to have a lot of cumulative benefits with and are relatively cheap to perform activities on compared to down that line. Few things I'd like to point out. Few meetings we've had in the recent past sort of dealing with the lack of investment, I guess, in tree seed research and infrastructure. And these are just links for your reference. Our 2019 meeting, Importance in Code and Seed Services, our challenges to future tree seed supply. And a few weeks ago, I was at a tree seed summit in Washington State. So everybody's very willing to share information, which is great. So what are our challenges? And this is a slide I've used before. I've added some green things because compared to 2019 and even last year, I'm very optimistic as to where we are now. Part of our big challenges have been facility closures. So we've had a lot of retirement or death in BC. We used to have 6 seed extraction facilities. We now have 1 fully operational, 1 operational for their mainly owned collections. But what's good news is, we have investment in Vernon here in a new seed processing facility, and we'll get to see that facility tomorrow with our dinner tour at Vernon Seed Orchard Company. There's also renewed interest in Douglas fir. What kept those 6 processing facilities alive is really the exotic seed market, and that's really not been very big recently, or a lot of those jurisdictions have started tree improvement and orchards with British Columbia species. But we are certainly seeing a lot of interest in interior Douglas fir for Central Europe, where Norway spruce is dying out quite quickly. Another challenge is really rapid succession, so loss of practical wisdom. How do we recoup all that information, particularly that practical information that isn't in the referee journals? We're seeing sort of lack of interest, motivation, and it's always quite puzzling, because we are always a good news story. This is a very feel-good industry to be part of. My glass half full is, cone heads don't like to retire. So we do see people continuing on in this field of work and extending their knowledge further than their golden ages. And I do think seed services are taken for granted. And I think we all need to do a better job of extension and making people understand the importance of our role in the reforestation system. A quote from a colleague of mine: operating behind the seeds, seed services are only noticed when they fail. And that's sort of the way we feel. Everything sort of runs smoothly in the background and you get a hiccup and, oh, it's a big issue. But there's a lot of things that happen quite well in the background. Certainly, if you've been following the press, there's lots of media attention regarding seed and tree planting. We still have more to do, but again, I'm an optimist in 2023. I generally try not to be ever a pessimist, but certainly some activities in our recent past had caused me to pause. I think there's a lack of research and education related to tree seed science and technology. I think there is an emphasis on the newest technology. We're often digging deeper, but not wide enough. We're often picking the latest, sexiest tools rather than the most appropriate or efficient. And this very vicious circle I see us getting into: no funding, no research, no people, no teaching, no progress. I see some inroads at educational institutes with tours and lectures, and certainly after COVID, this is starting to pick up again. So I think it's a good opportunity for each of us to contribute. Capital investment, and this is really, been the biggest roadblock for a lot of jurisdictions. Opening up a new processing, testing, storage facility is an expensive venture. Some good news: Washington State, Jeff DeGrand's here representing Washington State, and they've obtained funds to build a new processing and storage facility. We see through mass reforestation investments into their 2 processing facilities, and at our facility we're actually investing in new freezer cooler expansion project. And I'll just show one slide of that. There we go. This is our square footage. The blue is our current freezers, and we're basically duplicating our freezers and coolers right adjacent to us. And that's really breaking ground probably before I return to work next week. We're already fencing the perimeter. Got to get that inspected, and then we're moving into it. So in 8.5 months, they say, we're going to have new freezer and cooler facilities. Very exciting times for us. And it really speaks to the support we're getting at the provincial level, because this really isn't a cheap venture. Melissa, Melissa loves questions, and we love questions. These are the 5 ones we've been dealing with for the last few years. We welcome any other questions you may have, but please contribute in terms of what is your highest tree seed research priority? What is your biggest concern with tree seeds? What is your biggest tree seed extension information need? What is your most critical infrastructure need to secure your required tree seed supply? And what tree seed information is critical to having courses dealing with trees or forestry? So please give some thought to that. There is a QR code on your handout. And I'm going to pass it over to Melissa.
There it is. There we go. Okay. So welcome to the faces that I know, and hello to everyone who doesn't know me. So as Dave was mentioning, I'm kind of the other half. I'm mostly the technical person in terms of publishing the bulletins, trying to coordinate with people, being the younger, hipper, trying to encourage people to come to these kinds of meetings because we need to do this transition, as Dave was saying. So, I've sort of came from a bit of a left field industry in terms of being more in horticulture and conservation, but really think that forestry has so many opportunities. So happy to be here, and I'm just going to present a super short combined thing between both what I do with the Tree Seed Working Group to show you guys kind of the extent of some research that we have, all the questions that we ask sometimes that I have actually turned it into something, and just a little bit of update on some OECD conversations we've been having since the National Tree Seed Center, where I work, is sort of the national authority or point of contact with a lot of European folks, and we're trying to keep that opportunity and pipeline open as well if producers want that. So as Dave mentioned, I think it's really fascinating. The Tree Seed Working Group, to me, when I discovered it, mostly through Tanis Beardmore and Dale Simpson, I just was like, this is a huge gem. It's a golden gem of a little publication that's free and open to everyone, and it's got so much great information in it, and it was one of those things where I see these old scans of things, and I look at some of the names on them, and they're all the textbooks that you're reading. So the Tree Seed Working Group really was born, and the role of the editors and the chair were really to help consolidate and bring to light the same things that Dave's mentioning now, which is all the issues that are facing us, and make sure that the big wigs are hearing about it and that they know what practical information and the costs and the real work needs to be done. So these were people that were really the conduits between science, like the practitioners and the policymakers. So just a few of the things in no particular order that they decided in 1983 that they wanted the Canadian Tree Improvement Association to endorse was research into variation in genetic control of seed germination, seed population biology and ecology, seed and cone yield analysis, seed maturity related to reproductive processes to help pickers do better on picking and conditions around it, so some environmental work done then as well. Oops. Maturation and ripeness indicators to help folks, and seed crop management, production, procurement, protection. So that protection was also a lot of investment. They wanted to get in more the cone and seed insects at that point. And something that's continual is the making it efficient to utilize seeds, because just back then there was this big prediction that they needed billions and billions more seed to do tree planting. So it starts to feel a little bit like an echo. So I really do like combing back through the bulletin and just reminding people how much stuff is in there. So there's a table I did that just sort of looks at every time the editors went and tried to survey this, and you see this kind of lagged effect of things that were current and things that got solved with a lot of investment, but things that still needed attention. So we did do a survey, and it was really to inform the 2019 workshop, but we left it open for a bit because COVID, and we got the last few answers in during the 2021 workshop online. So just to paint a picture of the kind of answers and the people that put some effort into this, so people that answered mostly from Canada and the US, obviously. There's been some shift and change when I look at the survey stats from years prior. And there's a lot of engagement now with the US and less in Ontario being the biggest two changes. 50% of people, or 50 people said, yeah, we'd like to have an old printed update, but we said LinkedIn, it's hard to find students when they move around and teachers, and a lot of operational folks have been moving, so we just made a LinkedIn group to make that a little bit easier and help with students that are interested. And so we asked people to rank a whole bunch of new priorities. So I took the old priorities and then added a few new ones. And I'm sorry, because I realized when the screen was this size, it was going to be hard to read. But a couple of the things that really started to stand out to us in the list of all this, so this is in the bulletin, these are things that we're all trying to work on together. The number one that really still came through, even after I recognized that we should maybe wait it. If you have a problem with cone collectors, you probably can't start that pipeline that we were showing in that paper. So cone and seed collection, contractors, efficiency, shortages, succession, kind of came out by a bit of a Kentucky Derby nose edge. And then we'd never really asked people how important is the effect of climate change on crops, so that was number two. And cone and seed and yield analysis and seed use efficiency was still a top priority. So it just paints this picture that there's still a lot of the things that they were concerned about in the 80s we still have to continually train on and continually get information on. And as things started, so those were still top of mind, and as things started it was surprising to me more so that the educational components did wind up so far down the list. So they were, I think, 14th and 20th overall was about getting information into the education system. So we do know that a lot of people learn on the job in this industry, and you tend to get people you're pulling them in from other organizations, but I did find that a bit surprising. So just honing in on North American jurisdictions where most people answered from. Some of these I realize if you're a statistics person, as I'm starting to learn now, I mean, a sample size of 2 and 1 is not a lot, but the people that answer our surveys, I think that they're top-notch candidates, so I'm gonna take this as they know what's going on in their regions. So it was just interesting to see certain things in this in terms of, climate change being particularly evident, especially, the West Coast and Quebec, it ranked reasonably high, and even, not in Ontario, perhaps, but the climate models aren't as dire over there as they are in other places. And the other thing that came out to me a little bit was just seeded cone use efficiency analysis for an area that says that they, really do need a lot of seed in places that we really need to emphasize that in the West. And seed orchard management, in some places there really aren't orchards left. Sorry about that. So some of these smaller jurisdictions, New Brunswick probably stands out because they've got a really good handle on that. And so in asking people if they wanted to be listed for their skills and their job expertise and what research they've been doing, the most interesting thing to me about this whole survey was the fact that I went on LinkedIn or I looked on people's websites, and the numbers in orange and in particular were people that had retired just in the span of 3 years. So from the time they answered the survey, most of those people now were no longer actively working, and those in yellow had shifted jobs, so maybe they're not using those skills anymore. So, seed pathologists are far and few between. We don't have many people doing seed pelleting in Canada, although there's investments in that coming along too. We're seeing more so in some of the reclamation and restoration work. And we're definitely still heavy on the operational side because that's where all the activity is, but there's not a lot of people as much. We still know there's not that many people doing testing, for example, or investing in, spending a lot of time and effort working on biochemistry or physiology, the things that might solve some of these problems coming up for us. And it probably shouldn't come as a surprise to them, but people really did think that the way to keep our group that's so far few between is, webinars and this online platform now that we're so familiar with. So that's something that I really like to help the Tree Seed Working Group with, is having these kinds of things in between our in-person meetings. Because hugs are great, but sometimes it's the way that we have to get some seed problems and brainstorming done. So we had a really great spruce workshop in January that really brought 100 people together just to talk about spruce seed. So that to me is a good metric of success. So I know some people might think that this is an old hat, but the demographic wave that we're seeing, there's a book that I remembered when I was writing sort of the discussion section, and it was called Boom, Bust, and Echo, and it was written by a guy at the U of T in Toronto. And he basically said the demographics can explain 2/3 of almost anything. And just looking back over a few other statistics I was gathering for some seed supply analysis we were also doing for the 2 Billion Tree Program, actually, was just sort of looking at the history of the Tree Seed Bulletin, the things that have been accomplished, who it's been accomplished by, and the cohort of people that were tackling it together, because the brain power in the 80s and 90s was phenomenal. And there was a lot of investment from the forest. The federal government did a lot of partnership with the provinces and territories to solve these problems. And then, the provincial and tree improvement groups would really go on with it. So I'd say that, the things that we are doing so well at today that we don't want to let drop while we solve new problems are really a result of that. And I think it's something we need to be thankful for, because I see other countries coming along now that we perhaps, have shown them how to start it, but, China's just developing so much more seed technology, and there's all these other countries that still use a lot of our framework for success. And of course, some of the labor things, we got more efficient. We weren't stealing from as many squirrels by the mid-90s, some of us. So we just didn't need as much labor. And the people who do know how to do it now are so valuable because of what they do. But we do need new blood in here to sort of take what is done before and make it shiny and keep it efficient. And I went and looked at a few things in relation to just the national occupation standards. And there's been some really, if you look at the average of 10 years of wage growth, technicians that work for scientists in natural resources have had some of the lowest wage increases in the past 10 years, followed shortly by the scientists themselves. So there's this job vacancy thing that's happening. It's expected to continue. There's supposed to be, in some provinces, 40% opportunities for people that want to go in. People are going to have a full suite of whatever they want to choose for work. So we are going to have to maybe market ourselves a little bit better, make this shiny and sexy, and the investments that people see happening mean that the institutions that are making those investments are attractive places to work. I did find some stats as well from a couple federal economic development agencies that we lag quite a bit in training compared to the US investment, even in natural resource training. And of course, Canadians there's not a lot of us that work in forestry, hunting, and fishing. So those of us that enjoy it really need to tell young people that it's a great job. And I like to watch this little bubble go up, because I've had some conversations with folks and say, are you really surprised? Because, most people probably went to red seal trades in the last 10 to 15 years. Anybody I know that was a farm kid growing up, they've gone into construction and all those things. So I look at this bubble and think all these people that don't want to retire, the coneheads might be great to tap into red seal certification programs if we wanted something in Canada that people could learn and it was applicable to multiple countries. So seed orchard management, seed technology, and use is not something right now that we have as a sort of national standard for trade. And this was from the very first bulletin, and I think it rings true again that because our resources are so limited, it's absolutely essential that we cooperate and communicate with each other. As Dave said, I'll just pump it up again, that we really like having people celebrate things that they're winning at, share their challenges, connect with us, contribute. We welcome everything in the pipeline except rocks. And there's been a lot of, we call them the Mount Rushmore folks that have passed away, and if anything, all I spend most of my time doing is just handing people links and say, read this bulletin, there's great stuff in there, and then we can do the next thing. And I find most now what I contribute is a lot more visuals because there's so much great writing out there, but people want to see pictures now. And I think our cell phones are like some of the best things that we have. So that's my shtick there. And just a quick update. For those that were at the last meeting, there's the tree seed supply meeting that was last year in June. I sit on the OECD calls every year, so there's usually about 2 calls a year. There's a technical working group usually in the spring with all these countries, so a rep from each one of those national agencies that looks after forest reproductive material, certifying seed, concerned with forest research in some connection, but mostly for their operational producers. So we all sit together and we listen to what other countries are changing about their forestry policies, their laws, and genetics. But there was a question at the end of the last AGM that said, can Canada, can the CFS help increase and help facilitate trade? That's our role, is to help facilitate trade. And we do certifications. So our 2 primary offices, the majority of the activity, as Dave said, has been from the West Coast since we signed the agreement in 1970. It used to be 6,000 or 7,000 kilos a year at certain points. It's definitely dropped a little bit as the EU's been producing so much more of their own seed. So it's down to a couple hundred kilos a year, but still, whoever needs that seed, it's valuable to them. And then our office where I work in New Brunswick, we just help with reporting. So every year they accumulate all the statistics of all the forestry seed traded in the world, because you can't really look up forest seed statistics through the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They don't track quantity and they don't track genetics that way. They track phytosanitary issues and stuff. And then one of the most interesting things that came to my inbox a couple of weeks ago was the very first lot we ever certified from Old Masset, Haida Gwaii, is still circulating, and they want to transfer it to someone in the UK, I think. And they said, can you look up that paperwork for us? So it speaks to the longevity of the importance of genetics and tracking things. It's as simple as a little label, but we have the original records and could scan it and send it back to them. So those kinds of things, it's kind of amazing that, a bag of rice is gone within 3 years, but this thing's still germinating at 63% from 1970. So just one quick little overview of what OECD is doing is that the CFS essentially made an agreement with all the countries in the world that we would help market certified origin seed. So there's 4 levels of labels. Yellow is just a wild stand with just GPS coordinates as its provenance, so that's kind of the oldest level. You've got orchards or selected stands or seed production areas that have some phenotypic selection in green. In pink, you have orchards, and in blue, you have qualified, even more qualified material that's been tested that has good genetic gain values. So the thing that's become apparent to me is because we haven't been registering new stands and orchards have been really established here to facilitate our own domestic needs, other countries now are asking about our improved stock and how can they get at it. And we have to say, well, let's make a list of the demand and, what do you need? Why do you need it? Those kinds of questions. There's a lot of conversation at the October meeting about their 3 billion tree program, climate change. Most of the countries that do have restrictive policies about deploying native species, such as Norway, they're trying to think about opening up and doing more provenance trials. So we had all these questions, and the EU said, we'll help facilitate some meetings and try and consolidate some things. So for the last month or 2, we've just had some not formal calls, but just saying, what do you guys need? Where would you like it from? Obviously, it's mostly BC. So we had calls with Norway, Finland, the Netherlands, Germany, and there's a fellow that reached out to us who's the forester for the King of England, so he would like to know if he can get some seed from us. So that's kind of a fun email to get. But just to summarize the OECD, the first call that we had, it was interesting because for them, we're all in the OECD membership and we believe in tracking forest genetics, but they're mostly interested in seeing if they can find small amounts for provenance testing. Those don't require any formal certificate. They can get those exported and get them from anyone who's interested. So for you guys, Norway is mostly looking for coastal Douglas fir, just a few seed lots, and I tried to sort of match them up with the system in BC. So, small amounts, if anyone's interested or has any of this that you'd like to offer, they would just be looking for as much genetic information as they might have. And if there's breeding program data in the back end, that's the kind of thing that would be good good to help with their genetics programs. So Finland was looking mostly for interior Douglas fir, and their area of catchment was huge. It's anywhere from Crow's Nest up to Prince George. It's a little big. And then for the Netherlands, they had a lot of operational needs, so these would need to be certified. Anything in yellow would need a certification from us, so they're looking for the southern Chilliwack area of coastal Douglas fir based on provenance tests they already have. They're looking for some Sitka spruce and some grand fir. And they were saying that they could project they'd get 50 to 100 kilos a year. Germany had a lot more specific requirements. So the Thunen Institute of Forest Genetics, there's a PhD candidate working there, or a PhD supervisor overseeing some students who's looking for doing a lot more, some really specific stuff. So they probably want to talk to the breeding program folks, or FGC. So I'll try and facilitate this with our Pacific office contact. Vince Waring's our person who does our all inspections out here. And then there was something that they brought up that I had to do just a little bit of reading on, which was pitch pine canker. It seems to affect more of the southeastern pines and a lot of the subtropical pines, as well as Douglas fir. So there's no known occurrences of this canker yet in Canada, and just talking with Nicholas Foe and Todd Ramsfield within our offices who have been doing some testing, saying that it's possible that we could detect it with what Nicholas presented last year at a meeting, but we need demand and funding to certify each lot for this, so that's going to have to be an ongoing point of discussion. And yes, that concludes that part for me. So we did talk about the fact that the National Tree Seed Center does keep a lot of lots. Most of them would only qualify for the lower level. So Germany said, we don't plant source identified stock anymore. We would want to get stuff from orchards. So if there's any way that we can help, we export seed all the time. So it's one of the things that we said that we would try to do if there's interest, or we can talk to foresters over there directly. So I'm going to ask the presenters. Actually, I'll stop for 1 second. I've got time for one question if anyone had any. Dave?
So is there any discussion on certifying seeds that are already in the system, that weren't certified at the time of collection?
Yeah, so that was a question that we had for them, because if you read the OECD rules, CFS is supposed to oversee everything, and we've basically said if it's coming from BC, we're assuming based on the most recent, anything under the Chief Standards Act, like anything that would be recent, should be able to be retroactively certified. So there should be an opportunity to recognize that, and it might just be a couple of check boxes we go through. I think that you guys are above and beyond. So if any of that interests anyone, or you just know that there's some breeding seed that may be possible and available, it's really just an information sharing exercise at this point. And the one slide I took out was that we do have access now to their online system. It's called Formatus. So if we wanted, they gave us a login to say if we want to list seed there, it'll be a way to make it a lot faster to facilitate trade for that. And I'm going to ask, so we have a kind of a special guest that we got to record. So if anyone knows of Dr. Graham Powell from University of New Brunswick, I pulled him out of retirement and asked him to do a recorded lecture and talk to us as if we're all third-year forestry students again.